Sorry, we had some kind of interruption with the signal. I was talking about the wind of change that was blowing from Africa and how it came through the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Yeah, Tito, yeah, we're back. During a time in which Garvey was being deported from the United States, and he prophesied that he would return in the thunder and lightning. And he returned in the spirit of Kwame Nkrumah, who I mentioned a minute ago, was one of his chief apprentices, who said that of all the books he read, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, this book inspired him more than any book he had ever read. And his move to organize an independent state in Ghana was partially based on the vision of Africa coming from Garvey. So the question is, since Pan-Africanism comes out of the womb of Ethiopianism, what is Ethiopianism? And what's its connection to Pan-Africanism? And why have the two had such an appeal, both to Africans in the United States, Africans in the Caribbean, and Africans on the continent? In understanding both the development of Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism, it's important to understand the conditions under which they developed. In the United States, one of the principal centers for Ethiopianism, and along with the Caribbean, the two principal centers for the development of Pan-Africanism, the African in the United States faced a set of circumstances different from those faced by Africans in the Caribbean or South America. While we all came on the same ship and got dropped in different places, the place that Africans got dropped here in the United States differed from the Caribbean in one remarkable and important respect. I've mentioned this before, but it is very important to understand in the context of Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism. And that is that while the Africans in the Caribbean get dropped off of ships into islands where they are almost always the majority, almost 90, 97%. So you could say African culture, as I said before, Eric Williams, Prime Minister of Trinidad, one of our great scholars, said African culture was dropped in the Caribbean. And then, of course, we have the European influences. And so we call this a hybrid culture. It's a culture predominantly African, but also mixed with European elements. And because the Africans were in a majority, it would just naturally continue. So in a place like Jamaica or Haiti or Barbados, you couldn't outlaw the drum because there's very few whites on that island to enforce that. The Africans were the overwhelming majority. But in the United States, they could get into some of your business, so the drum could be outlawed. And so in the US, there was a much more wholesale attack on African peoplehood and African culture. And so it means that the African in the United States would have to do some things different from what Africans in the Caribbean and in some parts of South America, particularly Suriname, would have to do, where they were a majority. And it leads to the creation of a distinct ethos. All Africans have this common ethos coming out of Africa based on Ma'at, harmony, truth, justice, balance, right order. Ethics are key to all African people. So in that sense, this is the same here in the United States as is everywhere else. But what really distinguishes the African in the United States is the way in which we had to respond to this new circumstance where in the US, genocide is carried out against Native Americans. The same was done in the Caribbean against the Caribs, the Arawaks, but the difference is Africans become the majority in those islands. Here, whites become the majority overall, though in the beginning, African numbers are high, and in certain states like South Carolina, Africans are in the majority. And interestingly enough, a number of Africans from the Caribbean, particularly Barbados, are brought in to Georgia and South Carolina, especially South Carolina. So when we're in a situation where whites have numerical numbers, then we have to do a different thing when it comes to African culture. It doesn't just continue automatically. There has to be an effort to make it continue. And this effort really leads to a distinct ethos for the African American. Ethos is your basic character, your basic characteristics. What's most distinct and original about you? My wife observed years ago, sitting on the porch, still courting, and she made the comment, she said, the African American has an ethos distinct from all Africans in the world. She didn't mean we weren't Africans, but she meant our ethos was distinct and unique. And that was a good observation from somebody coming from the outside that could see us. And for those of us who question what kind of culture we have, then if we don't have one, then we shouldn't have a unique African ethos. We should just behave like white people. But the fact of the matter is, because of the effort to destroy African culture here, because whites had a greater amount of numbers to put their eyes and hands on it, it took a greater effort for us, a unique effort for us to create this ethos. And so what is this unique effort? Anyone who observes the African American from the outside will tell you this, but the African in America is often not conscious of it. They will say that the African in America is the most creative African in the world, and I would add creative people in the world. And that's because, not because we were different from any other Africans on the boats, but because of what happened here. And in order for us to continue in African culture, we had to recreate it. And so when the drums are outlawed, then singing becomes a major means of expression. And of course, the Caribbean, there was an effort to, alter speech patterns, but in the Caribbean, here, South America, wherever Africans are, we have a speech pattern that is fundamentally African. And we call it Ebonics here. It's a Niger-Congo Bantu speech pattern. 85% of our people speak it, and they're going to continue to speak it. But the point is, here, in order for us to continue our African reality, we had to recreate it. We had to draw from essential African principles that resided in our memory coming from Africa and in our souls, but we had to rearrange it and also bring in new elements that we needed here. And two of those new elements we'll be talking about today, Pan-Africanism and Ethiopianism. But the point is, this leads to an ethos that is centered on creativity. The African American, by nature and impulse, is creative. We have a saying, I'd rather be the worst innovator than the best imitator. We like originality. And so our culture is stamped with that. And so that is the ethos of the African in America. And it makes us unique in the world. And it leads me to call this culture we created New African, meaning we drew from fundamental African principles. There's a whole lot. I'm not going into any of them today, but the most fundamental being spirit, extended family, humanism, those being extremely important, and freedom. And freedom becomes much more important and becomes important for all Africans in the Western Hemisphere and as they come under colonialism in Africa. But for the African in America, it's the hallmark of our creative expression. It is our way to express our freedom. And so every time we make a move that represents a new departure, whether it's in the art form or in the politics, we always go back to improvisation and innovation. That is our way of expressing our freedom. And so this is a unique, distinct quality of the African American. And if we are to understand Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism, we have to understand that it comes out of the birth pangs for the African in America of a new peoplehood. And that's a new African peoplehood. You can call it Black, you can call it African American, but it is the unique flavor that you bring to the world. In whatever you do, that's us. You got to be original. You hear what I'm talking about? This is the heart of your nature. It's the heart of your ethos. It's the heart of your essence. And I don't hear too many people saying this because I study you. You're my first study. I study Africa, but I even study us a little bit more because you can't apply the past unless you apply it to yourself and to your present. And what we've created here, as W.B. Du Bois said, it's the most beautiful culture this side of heaven. You hear me? And when God sees this culture expressed on a high level, God has to sit up in heaven and smile. And so when we're looking at Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism, it comes out of, for the African America, this bent towards creativity. And the African and the Caribbean also comes up with this new edition, Pan-Africanism. And we share that in common, but we have to create a culture in a different way, undercover, right under the nose of our oppressors. We pull off creating a culture and an art form. And the European has no art form indigenous to this country. And we come up with another mantra that's real key to African Americans. I've mentioned this before, to bring beauty where there's ugliness. And Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism were two expressions of beauty, but it inspires the whole culture.